Hello, and welcome everybody to the first ESL Spot podcast. I'm Sean Tyler, and it's just me today. As the first podcast, we want to do a series on life in Korea, getting to Korea, teaching in Korea, do's and don'ts, cultural things, how to get there, the best people to use, things to avoid when you're looking for a school, all of that. So for today, at least, I want to open it up and talk about public versus private. If you've considered teaching abroad and you've looked at South Korea, then I'm sure you've come across this. I'm sure you've come across deciding whether or not you want to go to a public school or whether you want to stay in a private school. And here in a moment, we'll talk about what private school actually means in South Korea. I taught in South Korea for a year and a half back in 2011 and 2012. So that's the experience I'll be using to give these answers. And before I went, I did a lot of research, just like everybody probably does and everybody should do before they move to a foreign country. I traveled a lot throughout my high school years and middle school years and even elementary school. I've been traveling most of my life. My family's a big pack the suitcase, get out there and see the world kind of family. So been all over. So it wasn't necessarily new for me to jet off to another part of the world, but it was the first time for me to leave the country to go live outside of the USA. So anyway, that's just a little bit about my experience. We'll talk more about that later as I kind of give my opinions on public versus private, because I did both in different capacities than other people, and we'll also talk about that later. But let's first start with private. What does private school mean in South Korea? Because it's not what you're thinking if you're in a Western type culture. So private school, I also went to private school here in, I'm from Oklahoma and I'm in Oklahoma right now. So I went to private school my whole life, basically, except for college. And as you know, private school here is, you pay usually a lot of money to get a private education outside of the public school system, yada, yada. You either know what it is or can do your own research. That is not what it is in South Korea. They certainly have schools like that, but they usually call those schools international schools. And I can't get into the specifics of how those things are funded, or if it's just the parents paying for things, or if they get some government stipends. I do know that the private school I taught at, or not stipends, but subsidies and not stipends. I do know the school that I taught at had some subsidies from the government for having a native teacher, and that's what we're called over there. We're called native English teachers. So if I say native teacher, that's what I mean. Not Native American or native whatever. I mean native English teacher. So a private school there is called a hagwon. And what it is, it's a company. It's just a company that decided that their business was going to be teaching English. And they don't just teach English. They have hagwons for a lot of things. They'll have language hagwons, science and math hagwons, other languages, music hagwons. Those are all big subjects for hagwons to pursue as a business. And some hagwons do it all. You'll do language for a little bit some days, and then you'll do maybe math and science some other days, or maybe it'll be all the same day. So, and I'm sure this was a big factor for me, but not the overall factor, but money does matter. So usually at a private school, you can make a little bit more than you can teaching public. I noticed back in 2011, 2012, that the average salaries for a private school, a hagwon, were anywhere from 2.3 million to 2.5 million. a month. And that, don't get your hopes up. that's not in dollars. That's in won. So I mean that basically equates out to like 2,300 to 2,500 a month, and that's just the easy conversion. It's usually a little bit less than the dollar when you're doing that. So 1,000 won is usually $1, but it's less. It's like 93 cents or 90 cents. I'm not sure what the exchange rate is right now, but for the sake of this podcast and for the sake of just kind of getting through this, so you can have general numbers in mind, we'll just say 2.3 is 2,300 and 2.5 is 2,500, and that's not to mention that usually when you're teaching overseas, at least for native English teachers, it's kind of expected that our housing is paid for. So it can equate out to 2,300 and 2,500, if not more. So those are the usual salary rates, but it can range, or not range, but it can actually go a little bit higher, or a little bit lower, and that's all depending on your experience, your certificates, your level of education, and so on. So the next big thing I'm sure you're looking at are vacation and sick days. And it's true. Anything that you've read, if you've done your own research up to this point about those vacation and sick days is true. And I'm sure what you've seen is that they're low. I think most of my friends who were teaching in Hagwons when I was teaching in public school, they only had about a total of a week off a year, and some of them had 3 sick days, others had 4. So it all kind of ranges around there. I mean, I've heard of Hagwons that give you 1 sick day and just Korean holidays. I've heard of Hagwons that make you work Korean holidays, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Let's talk about working hours. So when we talk about working hours with teaching overseas or teaching in general, you're usually referring to in-class teaching hours. So when I say that you work 30 hours a week, that means you're teaching 30 hours a week. And that doesn't sound like much because you're used to the whole, 8 to 5, 40-hour a week job. A 30-hour teaching week is really tiring. And you get used to these things, but that's a lot of class time. And not a lot of prep time is the problem. Because they're not going to, I don't even want to get into overtime and any of that because, and good luck seeing overtime pay at a Hagwon. That's almost non-existent. So we'll leave it at that. Usually it's around 30 hours. It can be from 25 to 30 hours a week. It could be a little bit more and it could be a little bit less. You could be working on some weekends, and you could be working on some holidays. So who do you teach at a private school? Well, if you think about it, most everybody is in school. So who are going to these private schools? Well, the answer is kindergartners. Your main, student you're going to find at a Hagwon is a kindergartner. So kids around 4 and 5, those age ranges. But they also have elementary school, middle school, and high school Hagwons, and they also have adult education Hagwons. So there's definitely something for everyone. But the majority of the Hagwons center around teaching kindergartners. So if you hate kids, like little kids, I would stay away from the private schools, the Hagwons. So where are you teaching? The cool thing about Hagwons is that they're everywhere. They are everywhere. I wish I was walking around Korea right now just to point my camera around and show you that literally I could walk out of any subway, turn around, and see a Hagwon. That's how prevalent they are across South Korea. And it's not just South Korea. We won't talk about any other countries during this series because it's obviously focused on Korea. But Taiwan, Japan, China, they all over Asia, they have their own versions of Hagwons, and it's huge. It's big business. If you haven't figured it out yet, teaching English around the world is huge business, and it's a great business to get into as a teacher, maybe eventually as a Hagwon owner yourself. And I'll have more to say on that, maybe probably in another podcast. I know a few people who've opened Hagwons, and it'd be cool if I could. No, it wouldn't be if, it's going to be when I get them on the show. Well, because we're going to have guests, and I want to have people on here talking about their experiences and explaining to you guys the differences between, what I saw and what they saw. Because I got to tell you, most of these Hagwon jobs, and that's, we'll say most teaching jobs overseas, they're like snowflakes. They're all different, come with different people, different salaries, hours, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, back to the point, Hagwons are everywhere. So, and I say that to say that I had some friends who were also, when I first went over there teaching in the public school system, I had some friends who were a part of the public school system that they wanted to get their girlfriends or boyfriends over to Korea to work with them. And we'll again talk about this in a moment, the English program in Korea is kind of a hard program to get into. It was a little difficult when I was trying to get into it, but from what I've heard recently, it's really difficult, and they've really narrowed the person they're looking for, and I don't think they're looking for as many people as they were when I was there in 2011. So this is a really great way to get your significant other over there with you, and that's exactly what my neighbor did. He wanted his girlfriend to come join him in Korea, and she got a job at a Hagwon down the street. It was terrible. It was a horrible Hagwon, and she had a horrible experience, but she got there. And getting a job at a better school, half the battle, usually, most of the time, is being in country. You being in country and then meeting you and seeing you in person is huge. You jump to the head of the line. So why are these Hagwons everywhere? Well, it's a huge cultural thing in Asia, and especially in Korea, and I'm going to focus on Korea, for kids to be in school and be studying as much as possible. Test scores are everything, and each country has their own version of standardized testing, of course, but definitely in Korea, they want your butt in the seat studying, and parents, mind you, parents want you in your butt studying from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. However, and I may get this wrong, but when I was there, a Hagwon staying open past 10 o'clock at night was illegal. You couldn't do that. And I actually read a really interesting article while I was there about a mom who would drive around, and she would look for Hagwons that would stay open late, or she would try to dupe them into telling her that, and then turn them into the police, and she would get a reward. And she was making some killer money doing it. But that's the why. Parents, it's the culture. They want their kids in a Hagwon, and it's a good business to be in if you want to be on the other side of it. So when can you apply to a Hagwon? Because if you're looking at going, I'm sure you've run into either you've missed a date for this year, and so now you can't apply to the public school system, or you're going to have to do it in a year and a half because you still have to finish school and get your TEFL and yada yada. Hagwons will take you whenever you're ready to go. If you have the credentials, if you have a bachelor's degree, and there's other places that will let people with an associate's or who are finishing their college degree come teach, but for the most part, if you have a bachelor's degree, you're pretty good. You're good to go, and you're an English speaker, and English is your native language. You're good to go. They'll take you whenever you're ready to leave your country, and we'll talk more about that later. So, what are the hours like at Hagwons? Well, they're weird. They usually start school because, again, if you think about it, who are they catering to? You're usually catering to kindergartners, and those kids at that age usually do a half day. So they'll go to school for maybe a half day in the public school system. And you know what? I'm not actually sure if they do that. I'm sure it's different for each province, or if it may be an option. I don't know the details on it for as far as like public school for kindergartners, but I do know that those kids are the ones that are going to the Hagwons. And so you're starting to teach them around like noon or 1 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then you're going to work until like 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And like I mentioned before, if you're working past 10 p.m., I'm pretty sure the law states that's illegal. So take note that if a Hagwon is saying that, oh, our hours last until 11 p.m. or 12 a.m., I wouldn't work there. In fact, I wouldn't really want to work at a Hagwon that stayed open until 10 p.m. That's pretty late. So let's move on from private and let's talk about public for a little bit. The salary that I started with and the one that I noticed between my friends when we started comparing salaries, it was around 2.1 million to 2.4 million. So that's like 2,100 to 2,400 a month. And again, like I said, keep in mind that they're paying for your place to live. So you're pocketing a lot more of that. Not to mention, like, your bills are non-existent. I think my bills when I was in Korea were like 150 a month, maybe. So I just kept all that money. You keep way more of it. Healthcare is nothing. The internet is cheap. Utilities are cheap. Food is cheap if you're eating like a Korean. So anyway, you're looking at making 2.1 million to 2.4, and they could have raised it since I've been. Vacation and sick days, this is where it gets nice for public school, and this is why public school is sought after and it's nicer. You get all Korean holidays, random school holidays, and I think 2 weeks a year off. So like a week in the winter and a week in the summer. And you get like 10 to 12 sick days. I think I had 14 sick days or something. I mean, that's ridiculous. My job I have here in the States, I really don't even have sick days. I have to accumulate hours to earn like one sick day, and it's a lot of work hours to get one sick day. So your working hours are also nicer in a public school. I only taught maybe like 22, 23 hours a week. So the rest of my time was for planning, and that's another difference between public and private. Your planning time in a Hagwon, they almost want you to do that at home. It's kind of rare for them to give you some solid planning time at a Hagwon, and both institutions will have, both Hagwons and a public school will have a textbook that they usually want you to follow, but there's a lot of class time in both places that you need to fill with being creative. Let's see here. Work hours, yep, we talked about that. Let's talk about summer camps, summer and winter camps. So school will break, and then you are required, at least when I was there in 2011 and 2012, you were required to teach and plan a 1-week summer and winter camp for the students. And it's not usually a lot of students. I think the most students I ever had in a camp was like 15. And that was a lot. That's a lot of students to sign up for a camp. But each school's different. And these camps are usually totally up to you. You need to plan all of them. I think I had fun with them. And I did like a Harry Potter camp, and I did like a traveling around the world camp, and I forget my other ones. But we did a lot of cool activities in these camps. So you can kind of make a theme, and if you like planning, you can really get into it. As far as I know right now, and this all kind of started going down when I was there, you're going to be teaching 3rd grade to 6th grade. So 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. They usually don't let the native teacher get to kids in the first or second grade. And excuse me, I should have got some water before I started this. They want the native Korean teachers to be maybe exposing those kids to English at that point in their lives. And that said, you're really just there to be the speaking teacher. The native Korean teachers handle everything else. Grammar, reading, writing, all of that, those teachers are going to handle. So all you're really going to be teaching is speaking. And, you know, they want your accent. They're hiring you because you are a native speaker. That's why you don't have to have, for most countries and most places, that's why you don't have to be a certified teacher. However, Taiwan is a little different. They want certified teachers in their public school system. And this may be changing for Korea in the future. So where can you teach in a public school? Again, all over. Seoul is the EPIC program, and then outside of Seoul is the GEPIC program, unless they've changed that recently. And the GEPIC program is a lot easier actually to get into than the EPIC program because, you know, everybody wants to go to Seoul. But I mean, and Seoul's cool, and I lived and worked in Seoul, but there's a ton of cool places around Korea, and Busan and Daejeon, and I mean, there's some cool towns that if you wound up in, it wouldn't be the end of the world. You don't need to be in Seoul. You can always visit Seoul. So when? Well, school in Korea starts at different times. So their semesters are going to start around the 1st of March. That's when my contract started, was March 1st, 2011. And then they're going to break. I forget their break times, but they're going to start school again in late August for their fall or like winter semester. So talking about my experience again, I used a recruiter to go over there. I used ESLstarter.com, and they're awesome. I'll just put this out there. I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever. I just had a fantastic experience with them. I have friends who use them as well. They don't focus on South Korea. They do all over the world. But they're awesome. They care about you. They'll go out of their way to help you. They met me in Korea. I know some other agencies do that as well, but they actually met me at the gate, and it was just a huge relief as I was just taking this huge leap of faith that I was going to even like being in Korea and teaching there. So that was cool. ESL Starter is a great company if you're interested in using a recruiter, which I totally recommend for first timers. If you don't know what you're doing, and if you don't know how to talk to these schools and what to look for in your contracts or any of the paperwork, you really should be using a recruiter. I have a friend who he did self-apply, but he'd already been to Korea once before when I went there for my first time. So, yeah, ESL Starter is awesome. And I went with EPIC. I was actually part of the English program in Korea, and I had to have a TEFL certificate, so I got that, and then I had my bachelor's, and I actually went in with a little graduate credit on my resume, so that kind of came into play later at the private school that hired me. I applied. Oh man, I applied in like late October of 2010, and it was like not until January that I found out that I was actually hired and had a contract, and I quickly bought my ticket for February. And I think I arrived in Korea, in the middle to late February, because once you arrive, you have to go through, I don't know if they're still doing this, but I went through a 14-day orientation just to learn some Korean culture, teaching tips for Korean students, teaching tips in general, because there were a lot of people there who had no education background, meaning they had no idea really how to be a teacher. So they kind of prepare you for that and what you're going to expect. So I was placed in Seoul, in the northeast part of Seoul, at a school called Surak Chodeonghakyo, which is Surak Elementary School. And the subway stop is Suraksan, and that's the big town around there. The big gu is Nohong-gu, was my big little town up there. And I lived in Gongneung, and I say that wrong. I just know I do. Every time I got in a taxi and said Gongneung, they'd always say, Where are you going? Gongneung. And then I'd have to describe the other subway stops around me. Taereung, Gongneung, Junghae. And once you get over there, it'll stick in your head. So I commuted about 20 minutes to work every day, and I use the subway. Subway's everywhere. It's really convenient. However, I did wind up buying a scooter, and that made life totally different, way more convenient, and added more headaches than the subway. But it was worth it. It was definitely worth it. I actually own 2 scooters, and they both of them people tried to steal, and they smashed up both of them. But that's another story for another podcast. So I taught 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and I gotta say that the 6th grade was nice. 3rd and 4th were okay, and kids are kids. But 5th grade, I don't know what it was, and I was warned about 6th graders because that's right before they go to middle school. My 5th graders were off the wall terrible. Just 5th grade was a nightmare. So I don't know what your experience will be like, but that's just a word of warning. Look out for 5th grade. I taught about 750 kids, and I was the only native speaker, English speaker in that school. And so out of all those kids, I saw each one of their classes. They had their own homerooms, and that was like I would have class 5-1. That was their specific classroom, and then I'd have class 5-2. That was another set of kids that were in the 5th grade that their homeroom was 5-2. So I saw each class twice a week for about 50 minutes, which is not enough in my opinion as an educator, but that's again another podcast for another time. At the time, like I said, I had my bachelor's in mass communications. I had a TEFL certificate, and I had some graduate credit and an MBA. So that all netted me 2.2 million won per month, which was awesome. They paid for my apartment as well. I had to pay my own utilities. But I mean, you're not even with. I had a friend he was a lawyer. He had just passed the bar in New York, and I think he was only making 2.5. So they're pretty fixed. They're not. Just because you have a law degree doesn't mean you're going to make 3 million won a month. Okay, I'm trying to keep this under 30 minutes, but we may go a little bit over. I had 4 co-teachers because it's the law that a co-teacher has to be in the classroom with you. I had 1 for each grade. And they were all different. They all had their different teaching styles and personalities and approach to children, which I'm sure you can imagine, because they're all different people. Maybe an example. I had one. She was 6th grade. My 6th grade co-teacher. She was really strict with the kids, really, really strict, and she did something that irritated me, just as an English as a second language instructor. She would translate absolutely everything I'd say. So she never gave the kids a chance to try to translate on their own in their heads. And that totally undermined what I was doing in the classroom. But I had other teachers who, really all the other teachers, made the students try to translate in their heads and listen to what I was saying and follow instructions in English and so on and so forth. But there's all different kinds of co-teachers, and they're all different and interesting. So at that school, I taught 22. It was like 22 to 24 hours a week, which was great because all the rest of my time during the day was just planning. I just got to hang out and plan, and really, I did a lot of nothing. I did, and we call that desk warming, where I just needed to be there. I didn't really have a desk. I just needed to be in the school, sleeping if I wanted to be. Which I'm sure that they wouldn't like, but that's the reality. I couldn't do paperwork because it was all in Korean. I couldn't interact with the kids more than what was in my contract and so on. So desk warming. After that, in 2012, after I did a year there, I moved to a private school, and I won't mention the name of the private school just because it was a bad experience. I'm not trying to blacklist any private school or whatever, and people may have a different experience there, but I didn't have a great experience at the private school I moved to. I will say that it was in this town south of Seoul called Cheonan, and great town, really cool town. I'm from Oklahoma City, so I'm used to like that kind of smaller town, but still kind of big city feeling. And especially now with Oklahoma City, we got the thunder and things are growing, so less people with some like big city things to do. That's kind of Cheonan. So really cool town, really cool people, really nice people. I was paid $2.5 million a month, and that was because of my graduate credit and my experience. They liked that. They paid for my apartment, which was also nice. But I had to teach 26 to 27 hours a week, so it was a little bit more. And actually, they tried to make me do paperwork for them. If you go to Korea, you're going to find out that new teachers and women teachers actually, because they're not as far along with women's rights as in, people may argue this, but they're really not. It's a lot of busy work, and a lot of like grunt work kind of falls to new people, and especially like new women teachers. It's still like a male-driven society. Men there, especially if you're like an older man at a business or at a school, there's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of hanging out. There's a lot of just like my way or the highway. So needless to say, they tried to make me do Korean paperwork, which made no sense to me. And I just refused. I just outright refused because it was not in my contract. It was not what I was being paid to do. I couldn't do it, more importantly. So that kind of created some animosity between me and the staff. And there's much more that happened. But my experience with the private school was not great. And it was like this boys club that if you weren't a part of the club, if you weren't like over 40 and down with going and cheating on your wife at a noraebang, which is like karaoke, where they then call these like strippers or basically prostitutes to come. If you're not cool with that, then you're not a part of the boys club. And I was not cool with that, so I was not a part of the boys club. I taught 10th grade. It was a boys' school, and that had its own challenges. But it was great. I love the kids. The kids were amazing. Teaching 10th grade with my boys, it was awesome. The school I was at, everyone's English ability was a little higher than usual. So I got to do a little more advanced. I got to have a little more advanced curriculum in the classroom. So that was nice. I think I had about 70 different classes, or not 70 different students. So like seven different classes. It was like 10 kids to a class. Maybe it was a little more. Maybe it was like 15. It was more like 15. And then we had a big class that me and a coworker split because it was too big. Another thing that school did was you're supposed to have a co-teacher. I did not. They were too lazy and decided to sleep instead of come be my co-teacher. So I was left with the kids for the entire lesson every day. That wasn't great from a translation perspective, but like I said, my kids, I always had students in there who could translate no problem anything that I couldn't convey to a younger student. And I know I haven't mentioned it yet, but you're not expected to speak Korean. And in fact, they don't want you to speak Korean. They want you to be speaking English in the classroom. So anyway, moving on from the private school experience, I didn't have a great time. It was a business at the end of the day. They treated the kids horribly. The kids were great, but they also treated their staff horribly. Like one student, stole my laptop, and instead of helping me get it back, I had to look for it on my own. And not until I threatened to call the police for the police to get involved, and they wanted to save face, that's when they finally like started helping me look for it. I got it back, thankfully, and I still have it, but and I have no idea how. Well, I do know how. It was an awesome student that came forward and helped me. So anyway, let's move on to the conclusion of this podcast, because it's kind of run long. If you get a choice and you can wait it out, go public. That is my recommendation. Go public. Public is the way to go. You get a safety net. There are people there to help you. If you're with Epic or even Gepic, you have a main office to call if your school is messing with you, and you can say, hey, is this supposed to be happening? Can they do this? This isn't in my contract, so on. And they will call on behalf of you. It's like a little union. You get a little union to stand up for you. If you can't wait to get to Korea, because I understand it's like a time game, and I actually had some friends about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, who they needed to get out. Their apartment lease was up and they had to move. And so they wound up going with a Hagwon that actually screwed them over. They're good now, and they landed some good jobs while they were there. Like I said, if you're there, it's like half the battle. But it didn't start out well for them. So if you have some time and you want to get there at a different time than when public is hiring, or you can't get on with public, definitely do some research. Do a lot of research, or go with a respected recruiter like ESLstarter.com, and let them help you. Let them place you in Hagwons, because a lot of those great recruiters won't recommend certain Hagwons that either screw them over or have screwed their clients over in the past. And just a note, with those recruitment agencies, they get paid for placing you. So if they're gonna ask you to pay them, don't use them. That is not a good agency. They make their money off of putting you in the school. So once you have been placed, that's when the school pays them for finding you. So moving on to a couple horror stories, things that I've heard of with private schools, and things that I actually have friends who have gone through this. If they went with a Hagwon, they showed up in Korea, and someone was at the airport from their school that they were being hired on to, a private school, just to tell them, hey, sorry, the job fell through. So you're here in Korea, but good luck, because we can't hire you. Some places will give you crazy work hours, like I mentioned. They'll make you work all weekends, or they'll make you work past 10 o'clock, or they'll make you work 12-hour work days. Avoid those. Some will say no sick days. Those are also terrible. Also, a downside to private school, like I mentioned, the hours are weird, and those hours are going to dictate who you're friends with. So usually, Hagwon people are friends with Hagwon people, and public school people are friends with public school people, because they're awake at different hours, and they're working different hours. So, I don't know. If you are an afternoon person and you don't mind working late, and you can find a good Hagwon that's respectable, go for it. Definitely. I've definitely heard of them holding paychecks for no reason, that you have to like start digging as to why they're holding your paycheck. Maybe just to find that like you offended somebody somehow and that's your punishment, or you're not doing all of the extra labor that they want from you, so now they're going to hold your paycheck. I've heard of Hagwons kicking people out of the country, or they can't directly kick you out of the country, but they can certainly make things really hard for you. They can not pay your lease. They can turn you over to the government and make stories up about you, because remember, if you don't speak Korean, you're there on their favor. Definitely canceling contracts. That's another one. That happens all the time. You'll be working for 3 months, and then all of a sudden, boom, your contract is canceled and there's nothing you can do. Or you'll be working for 5 months and boom, you come to work one day and the Hagwon's not there and nobody's there and they've gone bankrupt. I had a co-teacher, or not a co-teacher, but a friend who was a teacher. She worked in Taiwan for a while and found out that it was her school she was working for, she had no clue, was a front for like a criminal ring of, I don't know what they were selling, drugs, whatever, take your pick. But she came to work one day and it was gone. Everything was gone. And all the money she made, it got seized by the government because it was technically criminal money. So definitely do your research before you sign on with any private school. So I guess a downside to public schools, the co-teacher thing, it can be annoying, but legally you're supposed to have one for Hagwons. I think that, I may be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure the law is that you have to have a co-teacher with you in the classroom with the Korean kids. That was probably, I loved my co-teachers, but at the same time, there were a couple of them that were just kind of overzealous and I don't know, just kind of made it harder for me and for the kids than it needed to be. So that's annoying. Also, the amount of kids that you have to teach in a public school, and also the kids with special needs that they give you no training on how to interact with in the classroom. If I had training in it, and I do now, but at the time I didn't. Now I'd be okay, but back then it was like, I don't know what to do, and if their person who's supposed to walk around with them to the classrooms wasn't with them, I didn't know how to handle it. Those kind of things, and also teaching the same thing over and over and over all day, 7 times a day, that got a little old. So those are kind of some of the downsides of public school, but overall, public school is the way to go. If you can wait it out, if you can get on with public schools, and if you're okay with not going to Seoul, because that's pretty hard to get into, definitely go public. Anyway, I'm going to bring this podcast to an end. We've been going on for about 42 minutes now, so thanks for listening. If you have any questions whatsoever, there's a ton of ways to contact us. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Also, you can email us. Right now, our email with Gmail is eslspotusa@gmail.com. Feel free to ask. I'd love to answer your questions. Thanks for listening. We'll pick it up next time with some more stuff on some maybe cultural aspects of Korea that you should be aware of before you head over. So anyway, to all of my friends and fellow explorers out there and fellow teachers, take it easy and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.